Hello, folks, and good morning. Welcome to another edition of Know Your Units. Today we talk about the Divine Knight, Angel Knight, whatever you want to call them. They are the flappy human with wings and swords and things. Now this is going to be tied for the, well, I say tied. It's going to be in the top 3 as far as the final class that you'll actually run into in most situations. Given that the Divine Knight, the Paladin, and the Astromancer are basically out there in codas 1 to 3, and you may potentially encounter the Angel Knight anywhere, towards past coda 4, depending on how you run into stuff. Technically, they're available in coda 1, but hey, you know what? Again, people will have encountered them in all kinds of different ways. Now, this is technically a transformation type of unit, so just like the Ring of the Dead is required to turn any generic or unique into a Lich, the Angel Knight can turn any absolute generic into an Angel or Divine Knight. If I call them Angel Knights, I apologize. They were called Angel Knights for part of the series, Divine Knights for other parts of it. Angel Knight just rolls off the tongue better. Anyway. So you need a Ensanguined Rood to create this class. This is going to be available on floors 1, 2, 3 in San Bronze here. Tower of Law Eternal 1 and 3 are going to be your easiest drop points. Level 1 here has a chance to drop it from one of the units up here on the ridge. Typically you'll take like 5-6 runs of this map and you'll potentially run into it. I would say 1 is by far the easiest. There's no drop hits. The fights are pretty easy. If you've picked up your Ice Lich, that'll just absolutely melt this entire area, pun almost halfway intended here. Simply because almost everything in here is a air element, so Ice Requiem 2, Ice Lich. Yeah, that's just basically loot farming at that point. And then you've got level 3, which also has a chance to drop it, as well as I believe a few scattered drops all throughout this place. But either way, this is a transformation type of item. As soon as you put it in your inventory and use it in the middle of a fight, you can transform into this unit. Now, one little quirk to get this out of the way before I forget. This does mean that you can potentially use the Ogre Blade transformation while using this class. This means that you can potentially body snatch their skills into something else. So, for example, if you wanted to have a sword master that could sing, or you wanted to have, let's say, a Terror Knight that also charmed, or maybe you wanted to have a regular knight that silenced things, or you wanted a anti-undead necromancer. You have all of this stuff on hand. Basically, the way that trick goes is that as soon as you start off your fight, you go and you transform into the Angel Knight while being whatever class could originally equip a sword there, and then you just body snatch into another unit, which will transfer the Angel Knight skills into them. Okay, with that all out of the way, let's go ahead and get going here. What is the deal with this class? So this class is kind of a mix of a lot of other heavy options up to this point, but they also don't function like anything else in the game, having access to a very, very wide suite of just unusual bits and pieces. Now, by themselves, if you're expecting to pick up this class and have them steamroll the entire world for you, you are going to be sorely disappointed. However, if you're using them for their unique properties, they do stuff that nobody else can do. They're almost uniquely versatile in their skill set here. So, let's go ahead and get into this here. You may notice I'm a little bit more tired than usual while recording this, and simply put, this is because I already did this whole thing just a few minutes ago, and I forgot to turn on my mic. Fantastic. Anyway, let's get into this here. So weapon access-wise, they've got access to swords, one of the one-handed variety, hammers, bows, and crossbows. Now, all of these are useful for very specific things. They have access to every one-handed sword. However, hammers only gives them access to the Caldia as well as the hammer finishers. Bows will give them access to short bows and elemental short bows, which are basically the short bow long bows. I prefer to just call them compound bows, but elemental short bows seems to be the overall term most folks use. And then crossbows, which will give you access to the one-handed variants as well as their finishers. Personally, between all of these, I generally will keep them with swords, just because it gives you a really good suite of options, giving you access to a crit multiplier from your first one, your poison from your second one, a nice little ice AoE, as well as a finisher that gives that 10% extra on account of being divine. So this functions very well with the fact that they're locked into divine. Divine Knight, it's kind of a name. However, something like hammers will give them access to that long-range charm potentially off the Caldia, as well as the hammer finishers. I would say both crossbows and hammers are primarily here for their fire AoE finishers, to kind of get that fire and brimstone feeling, you know, the whole heaven and hell kind of deal, because the weapons themselves will not be terribly impressive in their hands. That being said, for crossbows, I would say something like crossbow, rampart aura, shield. That's a nice little kind of line holder. They can fly innately, which means that they can potentially land in an awkward spot, keep spamming those finishers. As you see from the skill list on the right side there, they have access to meditate too, which means that they're going to be able to spam a lot of cheaper end finishers pretty darn nicely, which means something like Brimstone Hail or the Hammer finisher are going to be really good in their hands. Additionally, you can always go for bows and swords. Considering everything about them here, this is actually a really handy thing. As you may notice, they have a longbow with a Dragon Slayer bonus potentially right here. That's pretty good, dude. That's pretty darn good. So potentially some nice solid kind of opportunistic bonuses there. So consider that their swords are their primary thing. The other 3 slots are for a secondary. Given that they've got a very wide amount of skills that they can potentially utilize, I would recommend just sticking with one finisher set. They don't need the rest of it. Anyway. So like in this particular case, like let's say they park next to a dragon, they couldn't quite get the Dragon Slayer bonus, so they could always attack it, activate Dragon Slayer, and then the short bow is here for when that dragon attacks them, they can counterattack with that Dragon Slayer bonus, you know? That kind of thing. So either way, lots of strategic options there. They've got access to their Constitution and their Insight for the usual stuff that they do, though it is a little bit funny that a Divine Knight is actually going to be less beefy than the Ranger in their default state. They are still a fairly beefy unit, but still, it's just a little bit of a funny thing. Next, they're also basically a knight that has access to Pincer. It's only going to be Pincer rank 2, but still that's going to be more than enough to get the job done, especially considering that they love to land behind things. So they're potentially a great team player there, and on top of that you can combine it with a Rampart Aura, creating a very defensive unit to go and just block things off, and then repeatedly activate Pincers. Really, really solid approach in their hands. Additionally, when I say tanky, I mean they have access to the Aegis here, which means that, yeah, if you wanted to go down that route, potentially very, very tanky unit. So you've got that there. Same thing for Sanctuary. One thing to point out on Sanctuary, something I've actually been trying with my Fairy lately. Sanctuary plus Stinky Set actually goes and completely removes the challenge of a lot of the harder undead maps in the game. If I can figure out where on earth I left Killdozer, there we go. Where if you combine the Stinky Set, which will basically render that unit untargetable by anything other than big AoE splashes, and combine it with a Sanctuary, you can repeatedly reposition them into dangerous positions to just block off undead units from moving to particular locations. So this is really handy, especially for something like the Divine Knight, which can already tank by itself, so it doesn't really even need that Stinky Set bonus, but potentially it can combine really well with a lot of their other skills too, so something to consider. Alright, on top of that, you've got your usual Petrify and Charm. They're probably going to be a bit more likely to run those given the cockatrices and fairies later on in the game. Anyway, then we have access to their songs. So just like the Swordmaster, they're actually going to be a unit that benefits really, really heavily from a high mind score. Now, the class itself already gives you a pretty decent lean towards that direction, and many of their skill pieces will actually give you a pretty nice bonus in that direction as well. So, for example, this, let's see, we can go ahead and go Ring in the Mind. We could +1 that for another +5 there. We get a little bit of mind off the Spark Guards. We don't get very much off this, but the Damask set will actually give you a pretty solid boost towards your mind score. All of the Damask armor pieces will be pretty good in that respect. However, bear in mind that the Damask Mail is alright. However, it's the Worm Scale, not the Damask, that gets the mind bonus on the basic armor front there. And additionally, for the helmets, just like before, you know, go over to these ones here. Holy Crown, they can't actually equip. I don't know why I'm going over to Holy Crown. They don't get very much in that particular regard. I believe it was the Frood. Yeah, well, the Frood would only give them resistance. So either way, they can minorly stack their mind. Aegis in general is just going to be the best for them, frankly. Anyway, whatever. Let's go ahead and move on here. So generally speaking, try to give them as much mind as possible, but just like the Swordmaster, Black Lizard Powder, Jewel the Avatar, it is going to pay off dividends. These two cheap items are going to make the class perform so much better in the late game. Not to mention it'll basically guarantee their debuffs in the early game, so just a nice little setup option for turn 1. But for their songs here, we can go in a wide variety of different ways. They've got Silent Song here, which is going to inflict silence and an AoE around them. All of their songs seem to have the same odds of landing, so, bear with me on this one. Silence, I personally don't feel like the Silent Song is particularly handy in their hands, especially considering that they've got Poignant Melody, which is just going to do Charm in the same way. Turning units around on the other guy is just, as far as I'm concerned, a better option of the same thing. Silence, not so much, especially considering they cost the same, but hey, maybe your mileage may vary. Then they've got Day of Reckoning, which is going to completely reset MP in an area around them. Very useful for disabling finishers, really handy against bosses and things. Potentially very, very handy. Like, this unit is actually very well suited versus the two Dorgi variants, where you've got an ability to reset MP, as well as Evil's Bane over here for doing extra Umbra damage. So just kind of nice and solid there. And then you have Requiem, which is going to do extra damage versus Undead. Just basically an Undead nuke in an area. Hits really darn hard, especially with cards and crits and things. This can absolutely delete entire groups. But again, it's pretty situational. They're very handy for clearing out Palace of the Dead. Like, Palace of the Dead farming with Divine Knights is very, very handy. A lot of their skills are going to be manual only, but this is going to be a nice, solid hitting option for them. They will absolutely delete undead units with the right setup here. Next up for the Celestial Song here, this is actually a bit of an interesting one, because instead of going for Exorcism, which they have plenty of access to, this actually will cause them to remove the zombie status of any units nearby. And this includes your own, this includes enemy units. Basically just anybody that's nearby, they'll have a chance to remove their zombie status. This can be really handy, like let's say, again, you're going through Palace of the Dead or something like that, or you're going through that one annoying map in San Bronzo with all of the undead dragons. This will potentially go and delete that undead status from them. This means that you can just kill them normally instead of having to worry about exercising. Situational, but one of those things that you can slot in to completely change a fight in your favor. Personally, as a day-to-day, I prefer Poignant Melody. With a combination of Spell Strike Powder, pretty decently high mind, and overall tankiness. They're kind of like a Armored Fairy in many ways, and have a really good chance to charm stuff. Just one act of this is enough to completely turn a fight around. So yeah, very, very solid move. I would say this is probably one of the strongest offensive abilities that there is. Not as good as Virtuous Dance technically in some ways, also technically better in other ways. Like, it just stacks on charm instead of removing charm in any way, but it also doesn't technically have as high of a chance to hit. Anyway, with Spell Strike Powder, this is still going to be very reliable into the later parts of the game there. Then we have Seraph's Pact for recruiting fellow angels, Absolution for getting rid of Condemn, again a very anti-Dorgi unit, Sanctuary Shadow and Rampart Shadow for putting down very awkward shadows, because again, they're flying around this whole time. They can go and put some pretty awkward blockages, courtesy of Meditate. They don't need to be fighting all the time like the Knight in order to generate the MP required for these. They don't have access to any MP stabs or anything, so you probably want to back them up with a spell charge if you are going down that particular route. Again, they're very good for going and kind of creating little choke points for stuff to filter through. Just like a kind of flying version of the Golem, they potentially have really good access to the ability to just like more or less tower defense an entire map if you're ever having difficulty. They're really good at disrupting movement. They're really good at turning enemies around, like stopping stuff exactly when you need to. And on top of that, they even have access to Evil's Bane over here for those situations where you just want to hit any Umbra units harder. So whether it's your Dorgi variants, your Gremlins, your Orcs, anything like that, it's just a Bane skill versus those guys. And on top of that, they get access to the Dragon Slayer set for that nice Dragon Slayer bonus there. And if you're thinking, wait a minute, doesn't the Fafnir complete the set? Nope. It does not! You want to have 3 pieces of all of that kind of stuff in order to get the Dragon Slayer bonus on them. So there's that. Gear-wise, they have access to most heavy armor type of stuff. Pretty standard loadout of things right here. Bear in mind that when they're grayed out right here, this doesn't necessarily mean that they can't equip them. However, they can't equip most dark things, just so you know. I mean, for obvious reasons, they're kind of an angel and stuff like that, you know? Either way, the Fafnir's Heart is kind of the exception here, considering that it's primarily an anti-dragon sword. And yeah, as far as one-handed swords, Racing is really good for those exorcism bonuses. They're going to perform extra well with this particular sword. However, something like the... personally, I like using the Fafnir's Heart on them because that Dragon Slayer bonus is really good. Dragon Slayer is an amazing skill, but being able to additionally stack that 35% anti-dragon damage on top of it and actually land close enough to land it, unlike the Dragoon, that's going to be really, really handy. Or if you wanted to run Stinky Set with a offhand sword, that's potentially also an option in their hands. It's not the fastest option, but it is technically an option, just so you're aware. And yeah, this actually gets us over to their spell axis next, which is a little bit interesting, because not only do they have access to offensive divine spells and things in the form of your judgments, your spirit surges, and things like that, they also have access to exorcism, and on top of that, they get access to some draconics. Not all by any means. Like, personally, I would have loved to see them get Starfall, but they don't get Starfall. However, they do get Nullify Strike, which means that they can potentially put a stack of Evade on somebody, and given that it's only an MP cost of 30, one trickle of their Meditate is all they need to go give somebody the Evade bonus. So, anyway, oh, by the way, just before you ask, it is only Nullify Strike, not Negate Spell. So they can't use that, they can't use Gift of Renewal, but yeah, they do get Nullify Strike. I think they got one of the other ones too that I don't have yet, I'm not sure. Either way, as you can see, this is a class that's got a lot of good stuff to it. It's really good at utilizing finishers. It's really good at consistently funding finishers. Got the Dragon Slayer bonus for a later game. It's got tanky options. It's got offensive options. Like, again, Dragon Slayer Elemental Shortbow, pretty darn solid for when you need that particular thing. Like, let's say you wound up in a situation where they needed to drop a poison on a Cyclops that was nearby, and then you have a dragon that's really far away that was originally going to be their primary target, but your Terranite is nearby. So you walk up their Terranite, you have them drop their fear on there. Suddenly you have this bow, that fear broke down their defenses, you can apply the Dragon Slayer bonus, you can fire that bow, you can still get some pretty meaty numbers off on that dragon there. So, they've got a lot of... I know I keep going on about the Dragon Slayer thing, I just find this bonus really fun. Their songs, especially Poignant Melody, can turn entire fights around on their own. Requiem is fantastic for clearing out Palace of the Dead. Celestial Song is just really convenient for getting rid of zombie status, again, in a lot of later game areas. It's just really, really handy for farming things. So you don't have to worry about having your Starfalls or your Exorcisms or anything else. It's just like, well, I guess they're just not undead anymore. Time to die like everybody else. So that's all well and handy there. The whole Pincer and Rampart Aura combo, really good for just those awkward blocking moments. Really solid for that. Sanctuary combined with Stinky Set is just a fun thing to take advantage of. So either way, this is a class with a lot of fun tools in their tool belt. I would recommend always stacking them for Mind. Bear in mind, in this particular case, I should have gone for a better Ring of the Mind on them. I just didn't have one available at the time. I think I had these on a few people and then just not everybody else. Yeah, apparently the Cockatrice is currently equipping the better ring here. And even despite this, they typically will see odds of their charms landing at like roughly 40 to 50% whenever their Spell Strike powder is applied, which is still really, really darn good. So just know that, yeah, this class's skills do function. It's just that the time that you get them in the game, there's a lot of things that have gotten really, really powerful off in the background. So it may throw your perspective off a little bit, but these guys are just really good at what they do. Great anti-undead unit, great awkward blocker, and yeah, just overall fun thing to use. Actually, one more thing I should probably mention, I totally forgot about that I meant to mention in the last time I did this. On this map right here, if you bring a Cleric or if you have Lord Denim with a Seraph's Pact, the two Angel Knights that show up in this fight, you can actually recruit them, and their loyalty is pretty low. So yeah, that's probably going to be the easiest way to get a hold of these guys, just so you are aware. Alright, see you next time.